And let me know if you think that this is relevant today. It's written in 1949 by Norbert Wiener. And it's about giving machines agency to do things that we may or may not want them to do. And of course, I'm being a little ironic here by running this animation in this way. But I find it extraordinary that he could see the world that we are in today, all those years ago. So the intention is a slightly ironic opener where this machine has taken over and is doing things such as showing us, but also taking away what it's showing. The talk is about antidotes to bad AI. I need to qualify this a little bit, but let's first start with the idea of pandemics. What is a pandemic? Well, I think we know we're living through one of biology, certainly. But there are many pandemics in today's world. But what is a pandemic? Again, let's start there. It comes from the Greek, meaning all, pan. And demic is the same root as demos, democracy, people. But it's intended, and this is valuable, I think, to know, it's not all people, it's people that are bound in a community because of the land that they live on. And we have global pandemics these days, which affect everyone in our community, but here the community is worldwide, certainly in the case of the COVID-19. But also we might say that the internet and the digital devices that connect 4 billion of us is inside of the technology we touch every day. And I think it's not news that AI, some AI, what I'm calling today's AI, to qualify it a bit, foments polarization and so on, surveils our lives, spreads social bias. So its impact is growing every day. And I don't think that's a contentious comment either. So I characterize this pandemic of today's AI. It's one version of bad AI, if you will, from the title. And these are the platforms that purvey it the most. They're not the only ones, different levels of result, but they all have AI inside. And I mean this ironically. And this AI inside is through code creating the automation of what? Of values, of certain norms, everything from how workers are being treated by technology that tells them what to do in a warehouse or in a store, all the way through to the platforms that guide our attention or take our attention. You can decide how you want to think about that. So this is a pandemic in my view. Not everyone likes me characterizing today's AI as a pandemic, particularly those who are favorable to AI. But this is what it does. This feels like a pandemic to me. And for me, the bottom line is it makes the world that we see and the world that we live in more and more, not 100%, but to so much of a percent that human purpose, for me, begins to be lost. So what is a path forward? What do we do? What do I do? What do I think we might do? So let me present a framework for talking about some remediation, a degree of remediation, not the destruction of platforms, not the revision of capitalism, but a small, modest, but perhaps still audacious plan. And let me explain this model to you. This comes from Hugh Dubberly and his colleagues. And if you look at the model on the right, the lower left is what is. So what's the current situation? And I've been describing that. I've been saying that the situation is as follows. Now let's move from that. This is what I'll do. This is my outline of the talk today, but also an argument for a path to action. Let's then move up to the upper left and say, to build a model of what is, to expose the concepts and the values that underlie, quote, today's AI, unquote. Now that suggests what we might counter with, what alternatives would be. And then let's move finally to the lower right, from alternatives to concepts and values to alternatives in a preferred future, to conjure a preferred future. So again, this is both the major part of the outline of my talk, but also a plan for action. So again, this is what we've touched on, the issue with today's AI. And now let's try to expose the concepts and values that underlie it. So this is where we get to the content. My way of thinking about this is that digital technology forges, creates, encourages a culture that's primarily focused on what computers can easily do, and usually for profit. So massive computers, massive volumes of data, massive neural nets, so-called machine learning, which is essentially what today's AI is made from. It's an unprecedented capacity to touch the world population, 1/2 of the worldwide population, let's say. But the siren call of the digital technology itself is irresistible. It's the technologists who are enthralled. It's the entrepreneurs who are enthralled because they can build giant businesses and so on. And there's some value in what goes on. I'm not saying that these digital platforms do nothing for us. If they did nothing, we wouldn't use them. But I do want to emphasize that the values inherent in the code are so often at odds with what it means to be human. And I think this is established. And I want to call this, for better or worse, digital culture. Because digital technology creates this culture focused on what computers can do most often for profit. So these are the values inherent again. Well, what is digital culture? How would I characterize it? Let's get down into the nitty-gritty here. I would claim that digital culture claims that interaction can be mechanistic. What does that mean? So each gesture by the human is interpreted easily, is well-defined, it's unambiguous, we know what it means, and it's so mechanistic that we can predict how to respond to it with our code. Another way of saying it is information for the digital culture is objective. It means the same thing to everyone. And AI's information is a commodity. It can be captured in binary data and reused and so on. And furthermore, intelligence itself is a process that sits inside a person or inside a computer. What is known, what the data says, is intelligent or not. If you start from these three definitions, which I think are valid explanations of digital culture, that is, the culture purveyed by the algorithms that we have and the digital Turing machines that we have, it becomes true in the culture that you can generalize human behavior and you can predict it. So I can predict what you need to read now, or listen to now, or buy now. Furthermore, if information is objective, then the same option offered at an interface has the same meaning for everyone. So I can use gigantic data sets and generalize from a billion clicks and say, yeah, this is what you should buy, or this is what you should watch. And of course, another important part of the PR of today's AI is that this prediction is intelligent. And so you don't need to have an interface where you can challenge its prediction. You just need to say, yeah, I'll buy that, or no, I won't. So let me give you some examples, and you'll know all of these, right? PageRank, also known as search. You can't ask why those choices were offered. Why is number one? It won't tell you. I don't care if it's proprietary, right? That's not a good excuse. YouTube shows you what to watch next. Last I looked, 70% of the videos watched are watched because of what it chooses to show users next. And what's the algorithm based on? Engagement. What does engagement mean? It means if you can piss off people, they'll watch more. If you can make them afraid, they'll watch more, etc. I'm not telling you anything new. And the same for the news feed. You can decline options in Facebook, but you can't define them. You can't refine them. You can't interact about them. So I would characterize these as lack of transparent intent on the part of the search engine or any of these systems, asymmetry of control of focus, it's controlling, you can't, and you can't control choice. It gives it to you and you can take it or leave it. So this, to me, is the codification of ideas, of values that come from digital. Let me give you a little example of this that maybe is more visceral. This is what I call the parable of Luigi's Pizza. And normally, if I'm in the same space at the same time, I ask somebody in the audience to say, Paul, I ask them to say, Paul, where's there good pizza? To ask me where there's good pizza. And I say, thank you for asking where there's good pizza. The best pizza is right across the street at Luigi's Pizza. And then I say, now ask me why it's good pizza. And they say, Paul, why is Luigi's Pizza so good? And I say, screw you, I'm not going to tell you. And of course, the shock of that has a moment where you can pause. And then I say, I just described Google. So Google, I'm claiming, is essentially saying, screw you. Take it or leave it. This is the best idea. That's how I'm going to treat you. And why we let our machines treat us this way when we would never let another human being treat us this way is a puzzle. My premise is that it's not the technology and not the AI itself, but it's how we make it, the traits that we designers, entrepreneurs, the culture itself, what we embed in it. And in pursuit of profit, engines are built that dazzle our brains and addict us, right? Addict us to our own human and biological vulnerabilities. But this isn't the only option. I'm proposing that we should shift technology from these digital assumptions back to our analog roots. And I would begin to say, we're at the beginning of this journey really, that novelty and choice, transparency and conversation can become new core principles. So this is the counter, essentially, right? Analog interactional frameworks as a counter to what we have today on the left side. So let's work through this. Let's ask the question, what is the substitution here? Well, instead of interaction being mechanistic, it becomes conversational. So there's interpretation and response, different contexts, diversity of point of view can come into it if it's conversational, instead of just being assumed to be mechanical and given. Information can mean triggering ideas, right? We often say that there's information transfer. Well, not where I come from. If you say something to me, the information is not in the words that come to me. They're not in the message. They're not in the bits that express the text that is what's coming through the message, that is the message. The information is what it triggers in me and my ideas and reactions, right? And what it should do is open new possibilities for me and allow me to do new things. And lastly, intelligence is relational. It's between us. It's not inside a person or inside a box. So these are alternative ways of thinking about these same critical concepts. So with Luigi's Pizza in mind, what would the substitution be? So instead of lack of transparent intent, you could ask the search engine, why is Luigi's the best pizza? And it would tell you something. It would say, well, Paul, I know that you're interested in something that's nearby because a minute ago you said that you were hungry. And I know that you care about sustainable sourcing and you want it to be open. And by the way, it got good reviews. And you may recognize that, of course, it's the other way around now. It's the generality that generates the proposal, the best choice, the number one in the search engine, rather than who I am right now and what I need. So similarly, I could be able to ask the search engine or any of these recommendation engines, which I happen to be focusing on today, does it serve gluten-free pizza? Because that's what I'm interested in. Can I collaborate on the focus of the interaction rather than be controlled by the machine? And lastly, can I introduce new choices? So these ideas are conversational and I say analog. And this is a way forward. Novelty and choice, transparency and conversation would become the new core principles. Okay, I can hear you saying, well, give me some good examples. Well, this is a challenge. A couple of years ago, by the way, I came to this very environment and I spoke about, I'm moving ahead because I don't want the video to run. I spoke about conversation as the heart of interaction. And in that talk from a few years ago, I talked about a model of conversation. You can get a quick sense of it. I don't want to go in detail, but the links are here if you want to download. Conversation can involve intent as well as action. And if I can interact with someone else at both of those levels, at the level of intention, purpose, goal, need, want, as well as getting something from it. So not just, I want pizza, but where can I get pizza? What kind of pizza is offered? What might I do to achieve my goals in pizza, not just whatever is convenient for the search engine to recommend to me because it's making money from it, from an advertisement, for example. So there's more to this model that one could go into about conversation, and I can't unpick it more today. But conversation, I think, is worth a reminder. Again, I spoke about this a couple of years ago. What follows from conversation? A shared history as a result of being together in an exchange. That means we create a relationship. Relationships, if they continue and are, what's the right way to say this? Honest, consistent, coherent, that really leads to trust. Trust can lead to respect, and respect can lead to a unity. And these require conversations. You don't get these attributes, these 5 things, without conversation. And from there, you can get community, commerce, culture, government, and society. And these demand conversation. So conversation is foundational to these things. So this is a quick detour in talking about the necessity of conversation to achieve these kinds of socially important aspects. And therefore, let's go back and think about how do we make a preferred future and how do we bring analog alternatives based in conversation. And where conversation is primary. Let me talk for a minute before I give you some examples about this dichotomy here. It's not a perfect dichotomy, but it's generally okay and valuable for the conversation today. And the left side, you'll see I'm biased one way and the right side a different way. So data animated implies to me that there's a binary logic underneath it, zeros and ones, surely. Socially animated is biological. Well, binary, biological, are they dichotomous? No, but work with me here. It's intended to be metaphorical. Maybe this one is easier. Discrete versus fluid. Deterministic versus open-ended. Here are a few more. Now I can generalize the ones on the left and say that they are transactional, while in general the ones on the right are conversational. And when I say transactional, I think you know what I mean. It's the stuff we do with our conversational interfaces today, especially. So we ask our Siris and our Alexas to play a song, give us a fact, in 1 or 2 turns, give us what we want, which tend to be transactional. But the richness of possibility and the value of conversation is a different thing. And that's what I want to see. So I want to move beyond the digital, or maybe beyond is not the right way to say it. I want to integrate the analog to the digital, and I want to create a combination of them both. And cybernetics, I'll explain why I'm saying that in a minute. Cybernetics brings a bilingual sensibility to thinking about these things. What do I mean by bilingual? I mean bringing the digital and the analog together, because I would claim that today we are dominated by the digital. So can we have a bilingual synthesis, an alternative to today's AI through cybernetics? Well, what's cybernetics? Why is it bilingual? And how does it create analog interactional frameworks? I need a brief excursion here. Many people think of cybernetics as robotics, but it's not. They think it's biomechatronics, but it's not. It might incorporate robots, but it's not the only thing. Cybernetics is not the same as AI, right? It's not these things. It's not chips in your brain. It's not freezing dead people. Cybernetics fundamentally is the art of steering. I know you're surprised at that. It comes from a Greek word meaning the art of steering. And what does that mean? That means sensing the world, comparing to what you want, your goal, your purpose, and acting on it. So it's about purpose. It's about systems with purpose. Now, it seems to me that systems that have purpose and a science about that, cybernetics, would be very valuable here. And I'm not expecting you to know the history. The history is complicated. And again, don't digest all of this. The gist of this is here. The origin of neural nets and AI comes from cybernetics. So in the 40s, cyberneticians invent neural nets. Then AI rises in a version called symbolic AI, not neural nets. In the 60s, it became very popular. Then there was expert systems. Then neural nets begin to come along as massive compute is available and big data is available. And then we get today's AI. We get it everywhere in our lives. And we get a version of interacting with digital machines that, as I think we know from what the world says, not going so well. And from my point of view, could go better. And so I want to emphasize the difference between cybernetics and AI. And here's another slide that's really meant to be looked at more later. Cybernetics is fundamentally about acting in order to know and about designing action with emergent goals and seeing where you end up. It's not about gathering knowledge the way science is. Today's AI is a very different point of view. The intelligence is inside, you build it in and then you're done. And it's about efficiency and scale. And there are a few more things to say. Again, I don't ask that you read all of this in Grok. Maybe it's too much, but the slide deck is intended as a reference later. But how does cybernetics move us forward? Well, it's developed before AI and was the foundation, and it's about purpose. And it has detailed models of regulation in complex systems. It also has an ethical imperative, again, beyond the scope of explaining here. I've got some presentations on that if you want to see them. It's transdisciplinary. It's not just about engineering or about coding or about sociology or about philosophy. It's about lots of things, and it applies across the disciplines, and it embraces the unknowable and the unpredictable, which is the world we live in. So perhaps not compelling, but the beginning of an argument for why cybernetics can bridge these things. And now the question becomes, what's an example? So last time I was here again, I talked about an exhibition that was done in 1968 in London. It had a wide range of things. It was called Cybernetic Serendipity. And this particular work was there. These are a bunch of mobiles. These are life size. You can see relative to the size of the gallery how big they really are. It was designed by this man, Gordon Pask, and this woman, Yolanda Sonnabend. And it had some very interesting features. It had an interaction between these large mobiles on the left and right and the black mobile in the middle. It had a kind of conversation. The original 50 years ago was built in analog. This version, reproduced by myself and colleague TJ McLeish, is built all digital. So it's a way of saying it doesn't matter what the technology underneath it is, but what's the idea? The idea here is, by Gordon Pask, to have analog interactions in this thing called the colloquy of mobiles. It's about autonomous agents that converse and cooperate. Feels like what we want between human beings. It has a bilingual sensibility. It's both organic and social and machinic and digital at the same time. Information triggers a response, but doesn't determine it. The mobiles may or may not interact with each other. They make sounds, they shine lights, as you saw very briefly. They may engage, they may not engage. And of course, they're pretty stupid on their own, but together they have a kind of intelligence in their interaction. And this comes from Pask's conversation theory, which is about understanding what makes conversation work. And can we make machines conversant like humans? Tall order, but what gets us in that direction? It's about rigorously trying to understand how systems learn and how they converse. Pask built a lot of machines. He built one in the 1950s that had this architecture. The human plays, sees lights, but there's a lot more going on here. It's not just a light show, but rather a system in which the machine, the music color displaying these lights that is watched by the performer. The machine gets bored. The human says, why is it getting bored? It tries something else, it becomes engaged. It's more like a two-person partnership, the machine and the human having a conversation. Analog machine. Another analog machine, this is a typing tutor. You learn how to type on the keyboard, and it brought you through increasingly complex tasks of knowing how to type well. Here's one of my favorites. The left machine is a teacher and the right machine is a pupil. These were made out of neural nets, believe it or not, in the 1950s. Too many stories to tell here. Here's another version of an analog machine. This is a teaching machine. What's my point? You don't need complex technology to explore the right side of this. You need the idea that you want analog frameworks and that you want to build new prototypes. So Pasc is one example. We're building more examples. We're looking at art, media, sociology, and interaction design for examples that are more analog, more the left side of that. Sorry, more the right side than the left side of this. A colleague of mine wants to build this prototype, and if anyone is interested, let me know. What if an AI system could facilitate conversations across distances in a way that generates continually changing configuration of ideas? And these ideas could inspire conversations that could provide new input to the systems and so on. This is very abstract, but I get it. There's an emancipatory and participative epistemology, way of knowing, way of being in the world as a learning system. And cybernetics is about that. This comes from my colleague Larry Richards. So what you've heard is this proposal to shift more to the right side of that diagram, to become more analog. Let's keep the digital that makes sense. Let's keep AI algorithms, but let's do them in service of novelty and conversation. So how are we going to do this? Who are we? What are we trying? I need to inject a tiny bit of history again, in the same way that I had a slide about cybernetics. This is a slide about a conference in cybernetics, a series of conferences, I should say, that were held in the 1940s and 50s. And they were funded by the Josiah Macy Foundation. So they tend to be called the Macy meetings. And these meetings and the ideas of cybernetics changed the world of science and engineering and humanities, believe me. These meetings were a fan out or a wave front of new ideas, a new language of what? Of systems that had purpose. A discipline that didn't care whether something was a piece of biology made out of cells, or a human being, or a thermostat mechanism, or a conversation among indigenous people somewhere, or the age of the Enlightenment. All of these things were encompassed by cybernetics as looking at purpose in human interactions. So the proposal of my colleagues and I is to create a new set of Macy meetings, because nothing less than something that ambitious will bring about the influence we want on creating and promoting analog interactional frameworks. Now, this is a tactical plan. Again, I don't expect you to read it all, but it's very specific, and I want to show you how specifically we're thinking about this. So A is, what examples are out there that are analog that we think are valuable? What is AI doing today? This is letter B in the lower left. Can we bring these two things together? Can we look at what AI does now? For example, recommendation engines. Can we do that better? Can we add conversational interfaces? Can we solve the problem of Luigi's Pizza as it exists today? And then in the lower right, can we code new systems as well as talk about other systems that already exist, per my colleague Larry Richards' idea? Can we code new systems for conversation that are more analog? That's the vision. Now, these conversations have been taking place over the last year plus. Again, in the presentation, if you choose to download it, all of these are links that you can go to. And we have a plan on the right for where we're going. So let me summarize. Today, I've argued that digital culture contributes to this pandemic of today's AI, and that the human experiences of interaction, information, and intelligence are compromised, because the kinds of interaction and information and intelligence that are being purveyed are from a digital viewpoint and not from an analog, biological, organic viewpoint. So can we have these analog interactional frameworks be more organic, conversational, and humane? Cybernetics offers a bilingual sensibility. It's not the only discipline we want to bring to bear. It happens to be one that I'm dedicated to. It's been my career. Others will come along, and we're trying to build a much larger community from the arts, from the soft sciences, from the hard sciences. But again, cybernetics may offer this initial glue, if you will, between analog and digital. And we want to make something. We don't just want to talk about it. We want to promote design patterns and prototypes to bring about change. And the urgency and the scale of that challenge means that we need something on the scale of the original Macy meetings. We want to have new Macy meetings in a network for the 21st century. So my invitation is, let's do this. The original cybernetics was transdisciplinary. I mentioned that. It was across all of the silos of the disciplines. That's necessary, but not sufficient. Now we need to be transglobal and diverse and across geographies, diverse in every sense that you know, and also transgenerational. I don't think I need to argue that. Now, we can be deliberate about what we want to conserve. So instead of running fast and saying, oh, we want new technology, this is what the technology is that we want, let's start by saying, what do we want to conserve as analogical, biological, social beings? For example, conversation, an ethical interface in which we can ask questions rather than just be told, hi, you want this video to watch? Take it or leave it. I'm not going to tell you where it comes from. What are the values that we wish to conserve? This is straight out of Umberto Maturana, by the way, for those of you who are familiar. And given what we wish to conserve, then use the technology to serve our principles, instead of vice versa, which is what I've argued we have today. The technology of digital is amazing, smaller, cheaper, faster. Let's just do whatever we can. Uh-oh, unintended consequences. So we're excited to see what can emerge, and I invite you all to join us. We have a meeting coming up on the 16th of October. Write to me if you'd like to be invited. And I look forward now to questions that you may have. Here's the Wiener quote once again. And here are some additional links at the end of this slideshow, which I will now end and invite conversation. And here again is the link. There were some things in the chat that I have not followed. Discussion.
I'd love to see Margaret Mead listed on that book. That was great. If you were composing a similar set of folks like that right now, I know that you're inviting lots of folks, but who are the intentionally diverse perspectives that you'd like to include? You talked about the different types, transgenerational, all that sort of thing, but in terms of thinking and background and all that sort of thing, I haven't heard a lot so far in this about ethics. Who are the missing people this time around?
I'm not sure. I don't have a good list. I can point to one document where I go a bit further into what you're asking, and that document is now in the chat for what it's worth. It was an earlier manifesto before we focused on today's AI. I know some anthropologists in the tradition of Margaret Mead. They are part of the American Society for Cybernetics, which I'm also involved in. And certainly anthropology and sociology is necessary. But I want to be very careful, and you've given me the opportunity to make this point. I'm willing to be audacious, but I'm not willing to be implausible. So I claim that that plan that I showed you, where we're going to look at what's out there, and we're going to compare it to what AI does and so on, I could do that myself, not as well as with a group of people, but I could attack that. I feel comfortable in that world, and that's the world I inhabit. It's what I teach. It's what I've done as a guy in startups and in design and in cybernetics for some time. So what I'm trying to make New Macy is a network of hubs. And there is a particular colleague, Eve Pinsker, who's in Chicago. She's an anthropologist. And she is looking at those aspects of the New Macy idea, which she can adopt for her interest, which is public policy. And I'm hoping to nucleate, I'm hoping that people will nucleate around themselves their own interests. And in that manifesto, there's a list of domains. And the only thing I can do is what you asked me not to do, which is suggest that there's a laundry list of disciplines, which were at the original Macy meetings, by the way. I don't know if you want to have me tick them off right now. I could name 10 off the top of my head. But it has to emerge, and it emerges from conversations. So we're talking about meetings. The original Macy were meetings, but it's the New Macy conversations along the way. I've had probably 60 or 70 one-on-ones in the last year plus, and then bi-weekly meetings with various people, including some colleagues who are here today. And it has to be emergent. So I think now we're getting a bit of momentum, and we're focusing down. The meeting on the 16th is looking at certain focusing problems. There's a vote about those problems. We will decide which ones we will focus on in small breakouts. We're designing what the conversational structure is in all those breakouts. We're using mirror boards, many techniques you will know. And we want to have momentum in these different hubs, these different areas. So it's a good question. I don't have a good answer at this point, but thank you. Other comments and questions? I'm particularly intrigued by anything that you know that you think of as beyond the digital constraint that I've been referring to, and to help us gather those examples. And Pask is only one that I know superbly for obvious reasons, but not the only example. And we do have a list of some other media artists who are doing very, very analog, very biological, organic, interactive systems. But we have a long way to go, because that's another silo, right? We don't want more silos. We want to look at many, many expansive ways of thinking about it. Dr. Gopal, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much. Are we imposing a structure on the conversation? Am I audible? Are we imposing a structure on the conversation? What happens if it is not there? The structure is not there. Still, it can be a conversation.
I'm not sure I'm following you completely. If the structure is not there, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for the point. Is it was nicely given as a loop in your on the website, and I'm reading that also on the link. But then what we are presupposing is something like a programmable structure where we can drive towards functionality that was necessary. Is what is the implication? Is that, did I understand it right? Is the intention the same?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So when you use the word programmable, that implies a constraint, and forgive me if I'm misunderstanding you. To me, that implies a constraint on how it goes back and forth between the participants. But the beauty of conversation is that it's open-ended and emergent. So the question is, and Pask has built versions of this in crude analog technology, can we take those ideas further and surpass them and bring them into the digital age more fully, where, per the proposal of Larry Richards, we have a platform in which ideas are helped to emerge. What does that mean? We could define that. And the emergence of those ideas among the humans becomes input to the platform itself. What does that mean? That needs to be defined. We have some ideas. But we don't want to fall into the trap of reducing to what the digital offers. And we want to maintain that the goal, the purpose, the thing out there that we're trying to head toward in the cybernetic sense is to help humans generate new ideas and new possibilities and do more together than they could do individually on their own, and perhaps more together than they could do without this platform, this digital underpinning, which has analog and biological and socially animated values rather than digital values. Again, it's very abstract, but does that help clarify?
Yes, I understand. We will have to break out on a few things which are there for clarity of discussion right now, but let's see.
Yes, yes, exactly. Thank you. Yes, this is where we are now. Thank you. Again, I don't want to pretend that we know in the cybernetic sense. We're acting to know. We're moving ahead on these conversations and on proposals and on the potential for prototypes and gathering examples from many, many fields at the very, very beginning of that.
So you were, asking for other examples. Are you familiar with the Santa Fe Institute and their Artist in Residence program?
I certainly know Santa Fe. I'm not up to date on the Artists in Residence.
So, I mean, I think it's an annual thing. So, I mean, if you were looking for other examples, that might be a good place to look for.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, I've made a note. Thank you, James.
Sure.
Wonderful. Thank you. Any challenges to the logic? Any moment when you thought, nah, I don't agree with that?
I've got a comment. So I don't think you can
Please.
fault the logic or the rationale or the need for this, but it's about tangible and about momentum, and it's about business case and business models and the so what and how to make people care. So what does cybernetics tell us about those sorts of problems?
So I don't know that it will help with the business case. That might be the worst problem in front of us. I think that we can argue, excuse me, I didn't say exactly what I meant. I don't think cybernetics will help to demonstrate or even argue that what Facebook is now doing, we can do better, or we can replace, or we can overtake. They got 4 billion, we can get the 4 billion. I'm never gonna go there, because I think that's crazy. Again, I'm not expecting to overcome the capitalistic instincts. I don't know if you follow what Mark Zuckerberg is doing and has been doing, but the more closely you follow it, the more disheartening it becomes. The ruthlessness of it becomes more disheartening. But where I think cybernetics helps is it can give us models for the kinds of interactivity that help any system pursue its goals. I would also claim that in its second order form, where there's a self-consciousness and an awareness of your own purpose, you look at how you see things, you look at how you look. I think there's an awareness that second order modeling can bring that will help us understand the kinds of interfaces, that will help us build interfaces that help us be self-introspective and self-aware, and able better to then interact with others through a medium such that we can get better outcomes. And I believe that if we present those and make them, prototype them literally, then some people will care more. And some people, perhaps designers, students, teachers, entrepreneurs. For me, success is the creation of that compendium of examples and some few entering the world. That's how modest and yet how immodest I would like to be. Because I feel confident that we can do that. If we build something that becomes a unicorn and is an alternative to Facebook and is socially, morally, ethically better, that is social and moral and ethical, then that would be fantastic. You did mention ethics, actually. Richard, thank you for that. Ethics is another area that I'm cautious about. They say in the Pinter play, I'm willing to answer a question if it falls within my province. I'm not an ethicist, although I've written about what would be a minimal ethical interface. And I would claim that something that's conversational is minimally ethical. I don't think, for example, Google search is ethical because, per the parable of Luigi's Pizza, it won't tell you why it made the choice. And if I had a friend and I asked that friend for advice, and then I said, why did you tell me that? And they said, screw you, I'm not going to tell you. I wouldn't go back to that conversation. And I don't think that's ethical. So for me, as a pragmatist, I want to constrain where I'm willing to talk about these things. There's a lot going on in ethics. You all know that. There's countless organizations, nonprofits that are given a lot of money by the companies that I've been talking about. Some call that another form of ethics washing. Again, that's not my province, and I applaud those who are working in that area. Tristan Harris, for example, I think has done extraordinary work, and I knew him when he was a Stanford student and not talked to him in years, but his humane technology nonprofit is extraordinary. How many people are there and what are they doing and what are they talking about? That's a way of getting people to care in that sense. But again, that's that. And what I'm talking about here is I'm trying to stick to our knitting, for better or worse. Yes, Karina?
This is a little bit maybe in that zone you said we're not talking about, but I just wanted to pitch Richard and I guess everyone else
Please.
A grain of an idea. It's fundamentally, if you look at the business way, like the business model underpinning all of these things that are unethical right now, like the Google search engine, and like if you even take Alexa, right? Like we're adding intermediaries more and more. So in terms of searchability and discoverability, it's less and less our own agency as people, and it's more and more an algorithm that's basically fueled by who's putting money in to get at the top, right? And so I think fundamentally to look at any system in terms of this is how we could envision it, like there's the noble intent that we have, and then the economical reality is if they're not able to monetize it, it's really hard to get in. But what I found was really interesting lately, and I don't know if you've seen this trend too, is there's been a lot of efforts on the side of people who basically said, you know what, I am ready to pay not to have the bias in, and it becomes a consumer supported effort, which I think you need like a critical mass. So you need education, you need like, it's an effort long haul. But I was amazed that, like there's the government, there's the private industry, but there's also the citizens, and maybe there's something there in the longer term if they understand the value of it.
I appreciate that very much. I actually pay, what is it, $10 a month for Neva just to get to Bing with an intermediary. So Neva is a search engine where they don't pass on. They're an intermediary. They'll build their own search engine someday, maybe. But at the moment, I'm willing to support that, even though I don't seem to ever go there. But I would like to support them. And I think you're right to say that the citizen has a say and may have power in that. I'm tempted to go off on a tangent. I think the problem with all of these platforms is I can post whatever I want for apparently zero cost, only my own time. But if there were a barter system, or if it cost me money to talk to 1 million people, would that alone cut down on things? But again, I'm not an economist. So that's another area, back to prior comments, Paul's comment, I think. We need an economist, right? At least economists. Yes, thank you, Karina, that was wonderful.
I think I saw a thought experiment for a social network where you were only allowed in your entire lifetime 100 posts. And each time you posted, it decremented. So you had to, so it was a limited resource. I cannot remember the site at the moment,
Yes.
but it,
Yeah.
it just comes down and it's like, if
Yeah.
you only have 100 things, you can only say 100 things.
Yeah.
Maybe you're a little bit more careful about what you post in the world.
Is there a currency here, however, where you might say something that is so valued by others that you're given more than 100 or another 5 or something? But would that just then go down the rabbit hole? And then the people who get, thousands of people to agree with their own idiocy, forgive the dismissal nature of that, the dismissive quality of that. So it might not be better.
You're just
But again,
reinventing influences.
Influences, yes, exactly. But again, with no cost.
I think it should go both ways. I think it should be people who are hyper popular, but also the ones who are really, really not popular, because that means they have divergent views, which might actually make them the interesting ones.
So Larry Richards, again, we've had some other side conversations, has had these ideas for a long time. I didn't know that. I've known Larry for decades. And I've also had some parallel ideas. So I'm very serious when I say I want to create a hub of New Macy conversation around a platform that would not have a lot of these pathologies, or would minimize the pathologies. I don't even know the right language, rather than encourage them, particularly when you've got Zuckerberg in the middle, fomenting all of this stuff and going after it. He's very frightening, but I digress. Other comments? You've been wonderful and generous with your attention and your comments. Matt?
I'm kind of staring at your slide 40 here, the two sides, the digital and the analog.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of thinking about it. You were talking about minimizing pathologies, but isn't it? I think of everything in terms of trade-offs.
Yes.
Full disclosure, I was Paul's student at one point, and we talked a lot about the trade-off between information and attention. And so what's the trade-off for conversation versus transaction? What sort of came to mind is, if I ask for pizza, the transactional reaction would be to hand me pizza. The conversational might be, why not a burger? And at what point does that become, is it agency versus effort? Like what do you think the trade-offs are? Why aren't we doing this? If it's so great, what, Zuckerberg would be doing it. If it was just a thing to minimize, they're good at minimizing, but what's the trade-off? What are they giving away?
So it's a great point, Matt. First of all, I want to disagree that if it were great, we'd be doing it, because there's an evolution. If I talk to students about the history of interaction design and I show them something like HyperCard, and they've never heard of HyperCard, and they go, wow, why don't we have this today? That's an example that great ideas don't always survive.
Sure, Engelbert
Conversely,
had a lot of good stuff.
Where are they all? Where's Ted Nelson when you need him? Right? I could go on and on about that. But the point is that similarly, bad ideas may rise, not because there aren't better ones, but because of momentum, 1,000 things, including money, quarterly reports, right? Quarterly returns. So that was a side comment. You're making a wonderful sort of continuum here between agency. Yeah, a lot of the time, I don't want to, if I say Siri, turn on the light, I don't want Siri to say, really? Are you sure? But not having the agency in which, when it is automatically turning on the light for me, or automatically saying buy this, or automatically showing me the next YouTube, because I can't engage in between, right? I can either walk away, which I'm not likely to do because I'm attracted, because I'm a human being, and it's an addiction machine. Right? So that's one issue. But not having any agency and any ability for Luigi's Pizza to say, no, wait a minute, why? So it's about maintaining human agency and the social dynamic and the capacity to have the conversation. I'm not suggesting I always insist that I will want it. or that any other human will want it. But never being able to have it, for me, is a definition. I claim this is axiomatic. I'm not saying, it comes from the history of philosophy, that not being able to ask is unethical, because it's a presumption of the other that they know more than I know. And it's a goddamn algorithm, forgive my French. How can an algorithm know more than I know? Right? Where does that audacity come from? It comes from digital culture. It comes from Bayesian whatever. Right? So neural nets were invented by cyberneticians. I'm going to make that point again. And in an era when you had to wire up, with a soldering iron, and you couldn't make very many nodes. Right? And where they were going with it, where Pask was going with it, was biologically more consistent. It was a conversational interchange for the benefit of some shared outcome. It wasn't for the benefit of the company that fed you the data, that led you to stay on longer, which made them more money because you saw more advertisements and so on. But I'm on a roll here.
But isn't that a feedback
talk all the
loop?
time.
Isn't that cybernetic in and of itself? And
It
it
is.
is sort of a biological pattern, consumption, to.
Thank you, Matt. No, you're great. So that's the human foible, addiction, advantage taking of these systems. It's preying on our humanity, the nature of our being human, I should say. Why do you watch the thing next and the thing next and the thing next? Lies, fear, and outrage. That's one
Laziness.
summary from Baron Sashikon. Who's speaking?
And laziness.
James.
James.
And laziness. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I'll watch that. Sure. Give it to me. Yeah, I'm on the couch. Next. Yeah, absolutely. But if you had a friend there and you said next, and the friend gently said, hey, Paul, you've been sitting there a while. You want to think about something else? If a friend kept you in the rabbit holes that you're in, well, wait a minute. No, maybe I just described Facebook. Sorry. Anyway, it's hard. It's hard. It's not easy, right?
I think what James said is interesting.
Go ahead, man.
It was a joke. He was saying laziness, but I think some of that's there, right? Like, is the trade-off of agency, the requirement for action.
Yeah. No, I mean, attention requires you to be actively engaged in your environment. It's easy for a lot of folks. It wasn't meant as a joke, but it was as a yet another thing for why I think it occurs is,
I just want to bring that there's something in when you look at business and the way they think about how to sell stuff to you, they always say they contrast buying toothpaste from buying a house. And so the decision making, if you're buying toothpaste, you're not going to stand there and read every label and try to figure out oh, I think this toothpaste, that would be just from an opportunity cost, that's a waste of your time. But a house means a bigger investment to you, so you might want to dig deeper. So I think the idea Paul was bringing of context is extremely important. When do I want to dive deeper, and when do I want to shortcut, even if I'm trading off the accuracy of that suggestion, right? But I don't know how a machine would know though, what's important to you versus me, or I don't know.
But I would argue that maybe the first time you buy toothpaste, when you leave college, right, you're no longer using your parents' toothpaste or the cheapest thing that you can get because you're in college. Maybe you do your research once, and then you don't ever go back and re-examine that decision, right?
That's really interesting. What, how often should you be reevaluating and taking, what Corinne said, how do you weigh the value of a decision over how often you should reevaluate it?
Yeah. I mean, my teeth are sensitive. I didn't know that there was a toothpaste that I could use for that. How would I learn about that? How would I come to know that?
Just
no
Google
easy
it.
answers. Just Google it. Well, Google's going to tell me to buy something. And then when I click on that ad, it's going to say, sorry, Safari won't show you this. I'm sorry. That's rabbit hole.
I think it's interesting around things like friction and incentives, and there's loads of things going on under the surface that you've got to really get into and get under to try and work out how the world actually works.
How the people in the world actually work, and therefore the world that we construct around them, where the we might be a small collective community that has a particular way of thinking about it, or an indigenous people that's been respectful of the land for 10,000 years, or, right? I mean, all of these examples exist. What is there to learn from these examples?
And I think that they're, different people are different. So I think, part of the problem is, or one of the things that technology does real well is we're going to throw everybody into one bucket. All people are exactly the same. And having conversations means that you have to think about how these different subgroups interact, and so the same piece of information doesn't mean the same thing to everybody.
Yeah, but how you make the subgroups, I think, is super tricky, because I knew someone who was they were studying basically people's facial reactions to understand as they were watching things, their emotional state, and doing like almost a journey map or whatever based on facial expressions. But how you decide to lump people together, like think about it, if you're doing statistical, because to study it, they had to go with large samples to numbers. But if you're the second, you're lumping people together because you decided that they go together, I think you're biased. You're introducing a bias, right? Like, who says that this is a profile versus another configuration, right?
So, I would argue for not putting people into groups. That once you start segmenting or trying to segment folks, that you're just doing the same thing that we're doing today, only in smaller slices. So, each person is a sort of a complex vector of interests, and, my complex vector is going to be very different than anybody else's here, I hope. At least that's what I strive for.
So does that mean that any use of Bayesian statistics, i.e. neural nets and machine learning with humans as input, is ill-directed, poorly suited?
I still think there's always trade-offs, right? Like, what's the level of effort to talk to everyone in the world versus treating, just the average of everyone in the world's, age, weight, preferences. Neither of those are terribly practical. And I think it's a moving target. It's just like Marina was saying with buying the house, like, is this a problem that deserves, asking 1 million people or 10 people or one person in order to get the information I need? I guess I default to asking people, like doing user research.
I wonder if you reversed it, but then I don't know pragmatically from like interface design how you would do that, because like there would be so many leverages, right? But what if the user could themselves tell you, this is what matters to me, and just build me a recommendation set or a dashboard or whatever that fits me? Then I don't need to profile you anymore because you just told me. But then there's a lot of like, do people know each other, like themselves? How long does it take to like fix? Like, I don't know how pragmatic that would be, right? But that would be like really ethical, right?
So forgive me for hawking Gordon Pask again, but the machines I showed you, and in particular his thought sticker from 1976, is an adaptive training environment which uses a structure of knowledge. So that has to be prepared ahead. So you're teaching statistics or the history of England or something like that. But every other piece of information it uses is about you, not about some smushing of 1,000 students for whom it's better to teach English at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and better to teach statistics at 10 a.m. because that's essentially what adaptive training is today, I think. I'm sure there are colleagues of mine who would hate me characterizing it that way, but it's so much more about everybody else than it is about me as an individual. Similarly, any recommendation engine today. Am I wrong about this? Please correct me if I'm wrong. But when it suggests a product, how much data about me went into that, and how much data about 1 million other clicks went into it? And is that an oversimplification? Tell me. I would like to know if that's an oversimplification, because right now, doesn't feel like it is.
So what does that say about things like the wisdom of crowds, and a sort of a one-to-one conversation is the antithesis of that, presumably? And how do we get to scale, or is scale no longer important?
So I would say 2 things about that. Did you finish, Richard? I didn't want to interrupt you. So the one idea I love in there is the idea of variety, which comes straight out of cybernetics as a law, if you will, from Ross Ashby. And the idea that we have in everyday parlance of diversity is partly about that. It's partly about social equality and partly about a wide range of views. So that aspect of the wisdom of crowds makes a lot of sense to me. But wait a minute. What are the proofs of wisdom of crowds? You got a jar of jelly beans, and if you ask 50 people and you average it, you get a better answer. Is that the same as talking to two experts about the best way to get a lease written an ownership agreement to buy a house, or a suggestion about how to get out of Afghanistan? Do you want everybody's opinion about how to get out of that? We've had 20 years of opinion about how to get out of Afghanistan. It didn't go well. Right? There wasn't one opinion of one guy who recently said we're going. It was 20 years ago. So I think wisdom of crowds has to be narrowed to value in some cases and not others. And also, if it's for me and about me, I want to know who that crowd is. Right? Anyway.
So it took me to sort of think about your question whether or not Bayesian logic applies.
Yes.
And I, in my opinion, maybe not right, but I think for very local, narrow problems, you can use the Bayesian logic, but for more global problem spaces, larger knowledge domains, it's going to fall apart computationally.
Something about it falls apart. I
Yeah.
agree. I mean, you can still make the computation.
Yes, but it's no longer accurate, effective, something useful.
Yes, there's some word there that applicable, appropriate, something. Yeah, great. The hype machine for AI and ML, and even artificial general intelligence is almost unassailable, right? And it's not just, Wired maybe is getting better in some ways, but there's so much nonsense and the repetition of hype for the sake of becoming investment target, investment magnet, not target, a unicorn. Everybody wants to be a unicorn. Money, money, money. There's a song about that. Anyway, so other comments? I'm devolving into the end of a long day, and I'm afraid that I may say something even more outrageous than I have already. Karina, yeah.
Because I come from Montreal, right? And in Montreal, there's a big AI scene. And the thing I was very sad about when I went to AI Fest was I spoke to all the AI people, which was great. They were all like, researchers in their own fields, and they were very much advocating basically like foundational science type of argument, like let us just explore and look at all these things, which looks very fine. But where the rubber hits the road, they got a huge funding actually from the Quebec government to encourage the industry of AI. And the Quebec government was so non-knowledgeable about what exactly it is that they're doing that they basically said, here's a huge pot of money. We have no idea who you guys are. So make a list with your names and what it is that you do and figure out how to split it, right? To which I asked, well, did you talk to any, what we would consider users? Like, did you talk, because they were first of all, it's really hard to design an AI thing for an individual. I think it's mainly targeted towards B2B. But then when I would look at like some of their prototypes or talk with them, there was like no security, like corporate security. Like there were things that were just very basic that if you were an enterprise trying to buy that thing, you would be like, well, this does not even meet like criteria number one. Yes. And I said, where are your users? And they said, oh, well, we just like are looking into great ideas and like we'll put them out there and basically people will adopt them. And I was kind of sad because I thought how amazing would it be if it was more multidisciplinary, where we would have, business people talk to actual like researchers in that field and programmers, and I don't know, like co-created in a way instead of having them, because I'm like, I don't understand how a market is going to be able to use that idea. And I think your idea looks so fantastic, and I would be mind blown if I would also be able maybe to augment it and see how could we fit like the system, because the idea is so great, and it would be sad that it remains like a university siloed thing. And I think at a more general level, like you look at so many great thinkers, and it's sometimes I wonder, like, where's society? Why isn't everybody looking at this and being interested by this? Because it affects everyone's life at the end, right?
Yes. Yes, many ideas there. It's complicated. Yeah, no, thank you for the comment. There's many, many things that one would have to address and talk about there.
Thank you,
Coming
Paul.
up
We're getting to
time.
the top of the
Yeah.
hour here, so I want to make sure
Yeah.
that we don't get cut off by Zoom. But any last thoughts or questions from anybody?
I'll
Only to
invite
say
you.
I wish Matt could reach behind him there and pull off a guitar and take us out with a song, but
I was thinking how
Next
enviable
time.
those are. How many do you have, Matt?
That's most of them, I think.
You don't even, you have so many, you don't even know the number.
Yeah, that's probably the problem, right?
Well, it's great to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. Those old friends and now new colleagues, my email's there. If you have interest, please get in touch. There are many more materials to share. Many of them are linked from the prior. Do I still have that here somewhere? No, I don't. I've lost my cut and paste. Anyway, you know how to find me. Thank you so much. And Andrew, thanks again for your wonderful hosting.
Thank
All
you,
the
Paul,
best.
and thank you everyone else. Have a great rest of your day, and happy World Interaction Design Day.
Thanks very much. All
Thank
the
you.
best.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.